All right, let's dive into one of the greatest detective stories from the ancient world. It's got everything: a king, a beautiful golden crown, and a sneaking suspicion that someone got cheated. And the only person who could solve it? The legendary Archimedes. This is the story of how a simple bath changed science forever.
But before we get into the details, I want to put you on the spot. Put yourself in Archimedes' shoes. As we go through the case, think about it. How would you solve this puzzle? Let's see if you can crack it before we get to the big reveal.
So, our story kicks off in ancient Syracuse with a classic royal problem: a magnificent crown that's surrounded by doubt. Here's the situation. King Hieron gives a goldsmith a specific amount of pure gold to make a crown. When he gets it back, it looks amazing, and it weighs exactly what it's supposed to. But the king has this nagging feeling in his gut. He thinks the goldsmith might have stolen some of the gold and mixed in cheaper silver instead.
Now here's the real kicker. The king can't just melt the crown down to check. I mean, it's a masterpiece, a holy object for the gods. So that's the impossible challenge. How in the world do you prove what it's made of without damaging it in any way? It seems like a total dead end.
Faced with what seemed like an unsolvable riddle, the king did what anyone would do. He called in the smartest guy in the kingdom. He summoned the brilliant mathematician and inventor, Archimedes.
The king's command was crystal clear. Find out the truth about the crown, but don't you dare leave a single scratch on it. You can imagine the pressure. The goldsmith's fate, not to mention Archimedes' own reputation, was totally on the line.
So how did Archimedes pull it off? Well, the solution didn't come to him in some fancy lab. Nope, it happened in the most ordinary of places. This is the famous story of his eureka moment.
Just picture it. Archimedes is probably racking his brain over this crown problem. He goes to take a bath, steps into the full tub, and splash! The water sloshes over the side. You know, it's something that happens to all of us, something we wouldn't even think twice about. But for Archimedes, that little splash was everything.
And just like that, it clicked. A total light bulb moment. He realized that the amount of water that spilled out was exactly equal to the volume of his own body that went into the tub. And that simple, everyday observation, that was the secret to solving the king's entire puzzle.
With this incredible insight, Archimedes didn't just have a hunch anymore. He had a rock-solid method. He designed this absolutely brilliant and elegant experiment to put his new theory to the test.
His experiment was just a masterclass in simplicity. First, he'd carefully submerge the crown and measure the exact volume of water it pushed aside. Next, he'd take a lump of pure, unadulterated gold that weighed precisely the same as the crown and do the exact same thing. And the final step? Just compare the two results.
So why on earth would this work? It all comes down to density. Gold is ridiculously dense. It's super heavy for its size. Silver is less dense. Think of it this way. A pound of gold is much smaller than a pound of feathers, right? Same idea here. If the goldsmith had mixed in the fluffier silver, the crown would have to be physically bigger. It would have to take up more space to weigh the same as a smaller chunk of pure gold.
And when Archimedes actually did the experiment, the result was undeniable. The king's suspicion was spot on. The crown pushed aside more water than the lump of pure gold. That was all the proof he needed. It had a bigger volume, which meant it had a lower density. The crown was a fake.
So, with the experiment done and the truth revealed, all that was left was to deliver the verdict. And in doing so, Archimedes was about to establish a scientific principle that would last for thousands of years. The science was irrefutable. Archimedes laid out his findings for the king, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the goldsmith had cheated him. A simple observation in a bathtub had just exposed a royal fraud.
But the story doesn't stop there. This whole investigation gave us one of the fundamental laws of physics, Archimedes' principle. It's the reason that a massive steel ship weighing thousands of tons can float on water. It's the foundation of how we understand buoyancy. A king's problem ended up shaping science and engineering for literally millennia to come.
So, what's the big lesson here? This story is just a perfect little nutshell of the scientific method. You start with a real, practical problem. Then you use observation and logic to come up with an idea, a hypothesis. And finally, you design a clever experiment to find out if you're right. It shows that science is really just a powerful tool for finding the truth.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about.
This principle, discovered over 2,000 years ago to solve a mystery about a crown, is still absolutely essential today. From designing massive cargo ships and submarines to measuring the density of materials in modern labs, it's everywhere. The next time you see a giant boat floating in a harbor, you can thank Archimedes and his famous bath.